No. Well, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started on our class. I gotta tell you guys, I am very excited about this class. It's funny when you create the class yourself and it actually excites you as you are going through it. Just to let you know, I presented part of this class as a part of an event that I did with my sorority. And the response was excellent. The people who were in attendance didn't want to leave. We actually had an hour for the class, and I was supposed to do 2 classes back to back. And a few of the folks were like, can we stay for the next session? And so that's when I realized that this was a good class, not only a good class, but a needed class. And so what we're doing in this class is pulling together a whole group of different things, right? We're and really making spiritual practice real, making it about real life in everyday practice, right? Because I think sometimes what we do in spiritual teachings is that we study it, we learn it, but we don't necessarily understand how to apply it to our lives. And if there's one thing that I've been on a mission for the past couple of years is to make sure that people understand how it applies to your life and when it applies to your life. And so today we're going to talk about the mind. We got a lot to cover this evening, and I want it to be interactive. Let me just say this now, and I will tell you guys, I am recording it. It will be placed on the YouTube video. So if you want to, change your name, turn your video off when you talk, be mindful of that. I don't have 1 million people going to my YouTube page. Most of the people who are on the YouTube page are people who are in the class or who missed the class. And so we use it as a tool to keep people up with where we are and what we're doing. So I do want to make sure that you're comfortable with the recording and that you know that we'll be using it for that purpose. So the topics covered in this session, again, is called Healing the Subconscious Mind. And what we're going to talk about first is understanding what is the mind and the place of the mind as it is in psychology, as it is in spirituality, as it is in science, right? The mind is a very powerful tool, but most people have no clue what we mean when we say the mind. And then we'll talk, excuse me, we'll talk about the different parts of the mind and the role that the subconscious mind plays. And then we'll talk about where the subconscious mind is stored, along with all of the pieces to the mind, truthfully. And then we're going to get into the interesting part of the night. We're going to talk about trauma. Because what makes up our experiences, what makes up our life, are things that we've learned along the way, experiences that we've had along the way, and how they might aid or limit us in our spiritual growth and development. And then we'll conclude the night with the discussion about the purpose of spiritual teaching. And just to let you know that there will be a couple places where I ask you to do some exercises. So just be aware of that. Again, we want it to be interactive. So those are the topics that we're going to cover. And like I said, we're going to start out talking about what is the mind and where do you believe the mind lies within your body. So let's start out with that first question. Anybody? Anjana, you cannot answer the question. Anjana has a background in neuroscience. So Anjana is excluded from the question. But anybody else? Where is it that you think the mind lies?
I'll go first because that's what I do.
Okay.
If I can. Obviously, I know you and you're more nuanced than most people assume. So the obvious answer is, well, your brain is in your head, so your mind is in your brain, so it must be your head, but it's not, because that would be too simple.
Right.
So, and then I've heard muscle memory. I know from going to the gym, muscles have memory, both voluntary and involuntary. Your heart and lungs beat all the time like there's no, you're involved. So I would probably say your whole body has portions of the mind, I'm guessing.
Yes, love that, love that. Anybody else? Okay, that's a good enough answer for now. We'll go to our next slide and talk about what we say. This is a beautiful quote. I don't remember where I got it from, but it talks about the mystery of the mind. And it says how accustomed we are to regarding the mind objectively, how conditioned we are to thinking of the mind as the brain, an isolated accumulation of, let me move my cursor out of the way, of gray protoplasm 2 inches behind the forehead, right? That gray matter that they talk about in science. And you can read the rest of it. I'm not going to read the slide to you, but basically it's talking about that the mind is the place of the I am, the personal consciousness of self, right? And as we begin the class, the first thing I want you to do is to throw out the old notion of the mind being the brain alone. Even scientists have expressed that the mind is an abstract concept used to characterize thoughts, feelings, subjective states, and self-awareness that presumably arises from the brain. The mind, in essence, is that which thinks, imagines, remembers, wills, and senses. It is a set of faculties responsible for such phenomena that occur in our lives. And the mind is also responsible with the experience of perception, pleasure and pain, beliefs, desire, intention, and emotion. So all that causes us to be, all that looks like our personality is housed in the mind. But as Jeff said, I'm quite nuanced. And I would tell you that the mind is just like he said, all over the body. And in Hinduism, in Buddhism, and a lot of different practices, they have brought this to the awareness, right? And this is the picture of the 7 chakras. And for those of you who may have studied chakras at any time, you probably are aware of the fact that there are many chakras throughout the body. But there are those 7 primary chakras that sit along the spinal column, going on up to the brain and beyond. So one of the things that is said about these things is that we become to the awareness that the mind resides in many places. Spiritual teachings on the primary 7 chakras gives us better understanding on the locations of the parts of information stored in the mind. And I like to say that the chakras are like, and nobody's under the age where they wouldn't remember a floppy disk. But I like to refer to the chakras as a floppy disk or a storage drive. And each one of them stores data that's in experiences that have happened to us over our lives. The chakras are like our own personal Akashic records. Everybody knows what the Akashic records is? Yes, no, maybe so? No.
Yes.
Okay. So for those who know who the Akashic record, can you help Jeff out and explain a little bit to him what the Akashic records are?
You want me to do it? So first I'll go back a little bit to what Letitia was saying, and Letitia, forgive me if I'm jumping the gun, but according to Hinduism, there are 5 sheaths that cover the body. The
You're
mind.
jumping ahead of time, so I'm asking you to pull that one back.
Okay, I'll pull it back.
Yeah,
So
pull that
the
one back.
Akshaic records is your energy imprints that are left behind your DNA, your energy, your DNA imprints based on your energetic body. It's left behind in space and time. And so that is what is that's what tells you where you were and where you will be going. based on that imprint. That's your energy imprint that you leave.
I think I got it.
Good deal. So your Akashic records, and you'll keep in mind that in certain traditions, they do believe in reincarnation. And so just like in real life, energy never dies, it only changes forms. So do these experiences. They don't die. When your body gives up on you, your spirit, these memory banks live on within you. And so you carry them from iteration to iteration of being, and they're there. They're accessible. The information is accessible to you. So that's what is meant by the Akashic records on a personal level. On a universal level, the Akashic records refers to all the information that is stored in what we might call divine mind or the universe. Everything that exists, all the information from the beginning of time, the experiences, the lives, the history is all in the ethers, in the universe as energy floating throughout. And people are able to tap into that energy as needed, right? So that's the Akashic records on a universal level. But on a personal level, is even if you don't believe in past lives, what you remember from childhood is a part of your Akashic records. Who you were when you were 18, 19, and 20. And all those experiences, good, bad, and indifferent, are stored within your very being. It's energetic storage that is just there. And it impacts how you function and how you move in day-to-day life. Now, just like I talked about the mind governing all those things, right? The chakras govern our decisions and responses even when we are not aware of them, because each is an aspect of our consciousness. Each chakra represents an aspect of our consciousness. So studying the chakras help us understand how our history, our memories, our beliefs are stored throughout our body. Hey, Shirley, glad you can join us. And not only that, but the chakras are connected to our organs throughout the body. So our grief, our pains, our joys and victories are stored in the chakras, but also affect the organs associated with those chakras, i.e., how our body works. And you'll see later on in one of the videos that I have that what we experience, even from a baby in the cradle, has an impact on our health, on our genetics. They're calling it epigenetics now. And what we pass on to our children. Evolution is very much a part of this epigenetics conversation, because as humans get better at dealing with X and Y, we pass that information through the genes onto our children. And so it's pretty deep to understand that the brain is not the sole source of mind, that mind is throughout our bodies, that intelligence is everywhere within us, everywhere. And so we get the opportunity to feel our experiences in every part of our bodies. And whether those experiences are good or bad, whether we hold on to them and how we hold on to them impacts our health, if nothing else. If for no other reason to release some of the stuff that you've experienced over the years, our health is impacted by things like anger, resentment, unforgiveness. All those things impact our body. So just something to consider. We'll move on to the next slide where we'll talk about exactly where you feel these emotions. So if I tell you that throughout your body is mind and throughout your body are centers for storage of information, then we must also experience the pain or the emotions of these experiences throughout our bodies too, right? Stands to reason That if I feel anger, I might feel it somewhere in my body. If I feel sadness, I might also feel that somewhere in my body, right? So just out of curiosity, anybody want to give a good guess as to where you might experience fear and anxiety? Anybody? No, nobody?
How about neck and shoulders? Like stress. I see people stress, their shoulders rise up and they look tense.
Yeah,
I would say solar plexus.
definitely in the solar plexus, the gut area. You know, when you get those butterflies in your stomach, if you've ever had to make a public speech and you're not a public speaker before, you know that you get those butterflies in your stomach, you get nauseous, you start to sweat. And so you feel that fear all over your body. What about sadness? Where do you feel sadness?
Heart.
I would say heart.
Yes,
Heart.
for sure. You ever had your heart just ache? And that's why we call it a heartache. Because when we're sad, when we have misery to come, we experience it in the heart. Imagine carrying for years and years and years deep-rooted sadness and unhappiness, the impact that it has on the heart, because that is a subconscious response to the stimuli, to the experience, to the memories. We experience them over and over again. What I always find interesting is that, you know, things like anger and resentment, they can be felt too. You're tense all over your body. I always feel it in my muscles when I'm angry, in my shoulders, even in my jaws. I feel it in my jaws. I'm terrible about clenching my teeth. So I have to release anger a lot or else I would have no teeth, right? But joy is another thing that is felt all over the body. When you have the beautiful experience of joy, it is so uplifting that your whole body changes postures, right? Something that I love seeing my grandson. I tell people all the time, if I'm ever having a bad day, all I got to do is see my little grandson smile and it just lifts everything up. And then my back straightens out, my shoulders relax, and you can visibly see the change in my countenance as I am experiencing joy. So as we talk about where emotions and experiences and memories are stored, we begin to see that it's not just a thought. We literally experience this stuff day in and day out without even being conscious of it, that our muscles tense up, that our stomach flutters, that our heart aches because we are experiencing sadness or fear or anger and resentment or joy and happiness. So now that we've talked about where the mind is, I want to talk about the three parts of the mind. And Anjana was getting ready to get into something. That's why I had to stop her. Anjana, Hinduism, if you've never studied Hinduism, Hinduism is phenomenal with things pertaining to the self and the mind. It's beautiful, beautiful teachings with a lot of deep stuff that's rooted in science, by the way. So if you ever just have some extra time and want to read a book, go to some of the Vedas or the Bhagavad Gita and do some study with those, because there's a lot to learn. She was introducing the concept of the doshas. Am I saying that right, Anjana?
Kosha.
Koshas, thank you, koshas. And there are 5 levels of being. And I talked about this a little bit more as it relates to the spirit, because they're energetic bodies that are different expressions of ourselves. Go ahead, Jeff.
I just was wanting to ask / reinforce, I think what I heard from you or Anjana a long time ago, that, you know, when you talk about Hinduism, I was under the belief or thought that it was a religion. It was a and it's not. It's more of a spiritual way of living or lifestyle type thing. Just because, people get touchy when it's politics and religion, you just avoid it. Hinduism's not really a religion, right? Or
Yes, it is not a religion.
It's a
It is-
spiritual practice. I would argue that at their heart, all of them are spiritual practices. We just made
Yes.
the religions. Even
Yeah.
Christianity is a practice.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
just practicing it.
The thing is this about any religion, and you are so correct, because every religion is spiritual. It's only when you start getting integrated into the practice instead of actually into the, what do you call it, into the ritualistic aspect of it,
Yes, the
instead of the spiritual aspect of it, then it becomes a religion.
Then it becomes religion. Exactly. Exactly. Any other questions before I go on? All right. Kathy, was your hand up or is it just there? Okay. All right, good deal. So I put on here 3, sometimes 2 parts of the mind. And the reason that I did that is because this gets a little muddy in psychology and science. And I'll share with you why later on. So recognizing that from a spiritual perspective, the mind is all over the body. We move to the understanding that the body has layers that like the body, has layers from skin to bone to internal organs. So too does the mind have layers, right? And all of these layers create who we are. Skin, bone, and organs create our physical body. And the consciousness, the unconscious, and the subconscious mind create our spiritual body. So skin, bones, and organs, physical body, conscious, unconscious, subconscious, spiritual body. So imagine that the brain is like a tree. I know y'all are like, why is that tree there? The tree is there on purpose. The brain is like a tree. The trunk, the branches, and the leaves of the tree is the conscious mind. It is the most visible. The conscious mind is the center of awareness. We are conscious of being on this call. We are conscious of sitting in the chair. You might be comfortable, you might be uncomfortable. Jeff looks pretty comfortable. We are conscious of being at home or in whatever space that you're in. These are all things that we're conscious of. And that is represented by the leaves, the branches, and the trunk of the tree. But then there is the part of the tree that lies beneath the surface, the roots. And just like in a real tree, the subconscious and the unconscious mind are the roots that feed and sustain you. The subconscious mind is like the shorter roots of the tree. How many of you knew that the roots come in different shapes and sizes and they have different functions, right? Yeah. Some trees, most trees have some roots that go pretty deep down in the ground, but then they have the shallower roots that are up closer, that absorb more of the water and function, and they're less perennial. As a matter of fact, the roots that go deeper into the ground to the underground wells and such, they're perennials. They don't die off. The roots that are more surface level, they'll die off. So the subconscious mind is like the shorter roots of the tree that are found closer to the top of the soil, while the unconscious mind is like the longer perennial roots that go deep within the earth. They both are storehouses of information. They contain data that causes us to be, but one is more readily accessible than the other. When we are unconscious, it is like being aware that your heart is beating. We're very rarely aware that our heart is beating. Subconsciously, we might have a thought, oh, I felt my heart beat when it flutters or something. But on a regular basis, we're not aware. We don't think about it. We don't think about the fact that we're breathing most of the time. We're not conscious of it. Because if we were actually conscious of it, then we'd probably try and control it a little more, right? Hold our breaths when we're going through stinky places or when we realize that the pollution is high. But most of the time it just happens. And amazingly enough, I found this interesting, and it's a little morbid, but it's powerful in understanding that you can't suffocate yourself to death, because the defense mechanism in your body, your body will do things to force you to breathe. You can't hold your breath until you suffocate, because the body will automatically force above what you're consciously thinking. It will force you to breathe. It's just a little known stuff. A friend of mine used to call me Encyclopedia Brown. Useless information, but information nonetheless. But I thought it was fascinating because it speaks to the power of the subconscious and unconscious drives within us to sustain life, right? Now, how the subconscious and the unconscious mind sustains life within us sometimes works to our advantage and sometimes doesn't work to our disadvantage, especially as we're trying to move into different places and different states of being. You'll note that, as I mentioned before, I listed 3, sometimes 2 parts of the mind. This is because many in the field of psychology see the subconscious and the unconscious mind as one and the same. And for the purpose of this class, we'll deal with them in that same way. But from this point on, know that when I say subconscious, it encompasses both the unconscious and the subconscious mind, although some people might pull it out. Now, let's consider what happens when the roots of a tree are damaged. A tree with minor damage to the roots will have some problems, but the tree will survive. Minor damage, according to what I found online, is approximately 20% of the roots being damaged. But if a tree suffers more than 40% damage to the root system, then the tree will die. The likelihood of the tree living is very slim. Why is this important? Well, as I said, the subconscious mind is like the roots of a tree. And when our subconscious mind is filled with erroneous information, such as limiting beliefs or traumatic experiences, our growth is stunted. Adverse childhood experiences, something that has become a very popular term here lately. They coin it as ACEs, and we'll see a video on that later on. Also stunt and limit our growth potential. Furthermore, when our subconscious is filled with things that are deeply traumatic, that cause things like PTSD to happen, then the spirit inside of us can be threatened. Life of that spirit, and I'll use the terms die, but I want to use that term and then turn around and say, but you can never kill the spirit, right? But it'll feel like it's died. Many people have kind of given up on life and are just walking around existing. Their spirit has been subdued to the point of being in slumber. But it's because of their experiences and their trauma. So I want to take we're going to section this off a little bit. And so we're going to talk about limiting beliefs. We're going to talk about adverse childhood experiences. And then we're going to talk about traumatic experiences, because there are different levels to these things, right? So to start off with limiting beliefs. Limiting beliefs can often dwell under the surface of our conscious thought. As a matter of fact, most of the time they do. But every now and then, if you're like me, they'll rear their ugly head. A still small voice will whisper to you, I can't do this. It's too hard. And the next thing you know, you're self-sabotaging. You're not working as hard as you used to. You have just sat down. When I clean the house, that little voice works on me a lot because I don't like housekeeping. And I'll say to myself, it's too hard. I can't do this. I need a housekeeper. And then I sit down on the couch and 2 days later, I still need to go and do something. Dishes is my worst thing. I hate doing the dishes. It's the most awful thing in the world. Don't know why. But I have to really psych myself out to do the dishes. And just to show you how powerful these limiting beliefs are, when I wash dishes, my whole body hurts. I swear, Shirley's cracking up laughing, but it's the God honest truth. My back starts hurting as if I'm having sciatica pain, and I don't have that problem. And I'm like, why? And the minute I stop washing dishes, the pain is gone every single time. But I have such a negative belief about washing dishes. It's irritating, it's boring, yada, yada, yada. So it's a limiting belief. I've listed a few examples just so that you can understand and get a visual of what these limiting beliefs look like. I'm not good enough, right? Or I'm too old or I'm too young. I've heard people say both. I don't have enough time. I've said that myself. I don't have enough time for this. Or I'm not smart enough. I don't have enough experience. I'll never be successful. I don't have enough money. I'll never be one of the best. And I'm not talented enough. Or my favorite, which I've seen a lot of men deal with, right? A lot of people who have ended up in prison or had some negative things to happen in their life, or had done some things to hurt some people. They get to the point where they start to believe that they've done so much wrong, they can never be right, or that God will punish them. And I'm like, at any given moment, you can change that story. So I want to ask that you take a moment, if you haven't already, and think about some of the limiting beliefs that you've encountered over the past year, or maybe over the past 6 months, this week, or even today. Yeah, today. And if you're comfortable, I want to give you an opportunity to share. And let's talk through that. Okay, I know I'm not the only one who hates washing dishes.
And P.S. You do have a dishwasher. You know that, right?
I do, and it hurts me to put the dishes in the dishwasher. I promise you, it's equally painful.
Letitia, I'm disappointed.
Okay, my limiting belief is my age. I'm too old.
Yeah, and most people think you're much younger than you are, Shirley.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm a lot older. I feel I'm truly older. I have some health issues. That's a very limiting belief. So
Yeah,
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 I can see mine in this, Letitia, and you know it. My
yeah.
limiting belief is that no matter how much I do, I'll never be, I'll never amount to what, and that's because of my expectation that, or I guess I don't know whether it's a limiting belief or whether it is not meeting somebody's requirements. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a
But
limiting belief.
it's a
What else
limiting
can you
belief
say?
that I'll never be the best or I'll never be good enough.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Angela.
So for me, there's a couple of them. One of them is I don't have enough experience,
Ah, yeah.
and that has been something that's been embedded in me, and I will continue to. That's probably why I owe so much in student loans too,
Yeah.
because I'm always thinking I don't have enough experience. I don't know enough about this, so I tend to want to go and take more and more classes to learn and learn and learn. When I had a friend of mine recently say to me, you know enough. You don't need another class.
Praise the Lord.
And I had to sit back and think about that, and she's right. It's a limit for myself, or I always believe, that I'm not going to say that I'm not good enough, but I have it's more, not, I can't say it's not that I'm good enough. It's just my expectations or basically my other people's expectations of me,
Mhm.
I feel are a lot of times what drive me to do certain things and overdo certain things based upon, both of my parents, where I came from and so forth. And people have always expected me to be more than be what they think I should be.
Yeah. So I would say that limiting belief, and it's funny because it's a limiting belief, I can be better. And it ties into I'm not enough. Because if I
Yeah.
can be better, that means I don't have everything that I need already. I can be better.
Agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Nicole?
Oh, I agree with Angela in what she was saying in regards to, not being experienced enough or smart enough. And what's so weird for me is other people see me in a way that I don't understand why they see these things in me. Even though I'm trying to embrace it, but at the same time, it's like, are you sure this is what you see? Just like with the situation I'm in that I told you about being a campaign manager. Are you sure? I don't have the experience. I don't have all of the knowledge. I just want to be a member. I just want to learn and absorb, but they're like, no, you can do it. Same thing when I was in the military. So just like with Angela, it's like, okay, so I'm doing these things to meet other people's expectations, but at the same time, I want to believe what they see in me.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird.
Yeah, others see what you don't see in yourself. And that's the hard part, right? But it always makes me think of a quote that I saw one time where they talked about how butterflies never get to see their own wings. As beautiful as a butterfly is, they have no clue of their own beauty. And maybe that's a way of us staying humble, having some level of humility, because if we honestly embodied what other people thought of us, sometimes we might be hard to deal with, right? But I also think it is absolutely necessary for you to begin to accept who you are in order to truly embody all of this, right? And we say this all the time in metaphysics and spiritual communities, that you are more powerful than you know. But if you can't begin to say that to yourself, then you will never begin to express that. And that helplessness, that not enoughness or not good enoughness will always be a driver and a limiter. Because the kill-all is what people see of you. I started to use the example of an iceberg, but I wanted to get away from the iceberg because I used it a lot. But what people see of you is only a small portion of who you are. Who you are is so much greater than what people actually see. And so if they're seeing greatness in the small piece, imagine if you could allow yourself the confidence and the freedom to express the allness of you. Who knows where you might be and what you might do and who you might influence. Isn't that a powerful thought? And don't think that I have ascertained, right? I still work on that myself. I still struggle with things like I don't have enough experience, or I need to be better. I still struggle with that myself. So you're not in this alone. So we'll move on to the next phase. And I love this video. It's really powerful. But I wanted to say this before I play it. When we talk about limiting beliefs in trauma, we often fail to take into account just how big an impact these things have on our own personal growth and development. However, the psychologists and scientists are making great strides in understanding how the environment in which we grow impacts our day-to-day lives as adults. The following video is designed to help us understand that better. And so we'll watch it. But once we watch this video and once it's finished, I want us to take a moment to discuss it before we move on to deeper level trauma. Okay, so here we go.
A child's experiences early in life are important building blocks for the developing brain. Genes, nature, are like the blueprint. They provide the basic framework for brain development. However, genes do not design the brain completely. Environmental influences, nurture, fine-tune how the brain works by shaping which brain connections get used. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent, whereas ones that do not get much use fade away. Together, genes and the environment build the foundation for all future development. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships early in life lead to healthy development. But children's brains capture other experiences as well. Stressful events. However, not all stress is bad. Positive stress involves normal childhood experiences, like starting daycare or meeting a new person for the first time. This stress is essential for healthy development because it helps children develop coping skills and confidence. But when stress is frequent, chronic, and uncontrolled, it is toxic to children, especially when they do not have a caregiver to provide support or buffer the stress. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, such as abuse, neglect, exposure to intimate partner violence, parental depression or addiction, and poverty are toxic stressors which could lead to lifelong changes in learning and behavior. ACEs early in development can impact social, emotional, and cognitive functioning, increased risk-taking behavior such as drinking and substance use, and increased risk of disease, disability, and social problems later in life. The question is, how do adverse childhood experiences impact a lifelong development? One of the most important systems in our body is our stress system. It's activated when we experience stress. We become alert, our heart rate increases, and so do our stress hormone levels, cortisol and adrenaline. Our body is ready to react, what is known as fight or flight. A short period of time after the stress is over, or if a child receives support from a caregiver, the stress response turns off and the body returns to a normal state. Adverse childhood experiences create stress responses that stay active, and without the support of a caregiver, the system has difficulty shutting off completely. This constant and prolonged activation can affect immune system functioning and increase the chances of sickness, infection, and disease. Prolonged activation of stress hormones is also toxic to the brain. Certain areas of the brain are more vulnerable to toxic stress, including the executive center or the brain's control center, an area important for solving complex problems, attention, reasoning, impulsivity, inhibition, and learning. A second area is the emotional center, the brain's alarm system, which is involved in processing and interpreting emotions and the ability to control impulses. The third area is the memory and learning center, the brain's filing cabinet, which plays a major role in learning and the formation and retrieval of memories. Science shows that adverse childhood experiences impact all of these brain centers. Behaviorally, what we begin to see is emotional distress, poor emotion regulation, greater impulsivity, learning difficulties, and physical and mental health problems. More recently, science has begun to look at how ACEs cause changes in gene expression through a process called epigenetics, which helps us understand how nature and nurture interact. Epigenetics causes changes in the way genes work without changing the DNA code itself. This occurs through chemical changes influencing how the code is used. In other words, genes are like the hardware in a computer. They determine the boundaries of what is possible. However, we need an operating system to tell the hardware what to do. Epigenetics is like the operating system directing the function of a gene's DNA hardware. The genes we are born with are the genes that we have for life, but experiences like nutrition, exercise, smoking, stressors, and relationships all affect our biology. Adverse childhood experiences are associated with epigenetic changes related to stress, brain development, cognition, and systems associated with mental and physical health. Changes that happen early in brain development are more likely to be enduring and are possibly passed on to future generations as well. The good news is that positive, supportive relationships at any stage in life can make a difference. However, supporting families and children early on will help prevent many of these negative outcomes. One of the key ingredients for healthy development is having warm, loving, and actively engaged caregivers. This involves promoting serve and return interactions, where caregivers actively and warmly engage with the child, making eye contact, responding to sounds, words, gestures, emotional needs, and sharing experiences like reading and play. Providing programs that support caregivers to strengthen these abilities are the blocks that build healthy foundations for life.
All right. So as you watch the video, what comes up for you guys? What are your thoughts?
One of the things that stood out for me were two. One was caregivers and experience, because if you can't always have any influence over the ACEs that happen to people. So you have to create experiences for them, and you have to have, it's twofold. You have to have the caregivers there to provide and support them, but you also try to create those experiences for them to offset the trauma that they have had before.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what I heard when you said that? Affirmations and denials.
I was watching the something news a little bit ago, and this little girl was up on the deck, and she was trying to jump off into the pool, and she said, "I can't do it. I can't do it." And she said, all of a sudden, she said, "I can do it. I can do it. I'm gonna be okay." And she jumped off into her parents' hand. I thought immediate affirmation.
Yeah. 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 The affirmation of the child, the caregiver, is substantial in bringing healing to any adverse experience, right? And we say that these are adverse childhood experiences, but these are the experiences that shape us and frame us. And so we may not have had the opportunity to deal with them as children, but as adults, they shape and form our lives, and they create our choices. They motivate our choices. And so we have to learn to deal with them. I'll say this, and I thought it was really powerful, that poverty is one of the ACEs. And we often don't think about the impact of growing up without enough food to eat in your home, or growing up worried that the lights are going to be cut off when you come home. My granddaughter, you guys, most of you know that my granddaughter has some ACEs from her other family, and that's the reason I have custody of her. But we came home one day and the power was out, and it was because of a storm. And she panicked, and she's 11, and she says, "Oh my God, did you remember to pay the bill, Grandma?" And I'm like, "Of course, Grandma, but it'll be on in a second." And within a matter of seconds, it came back on. But I became conscious of what that life was like for her there, and how it is still impacting what we're dealing with now.
Yeah, I know this kind of reminds me of my granddaughter, who was here a few weeks ago, and I was just looking at her. She was just so happy, and I call her my little comedian. She makes me laugh, but something in my mind said she wouldn't be that happy if her parents were divorced. And then I thought about my daughter, because her dad and I divorced, and my daughter's personality was nothing like her daughters, you know. My daughter was kind of withdrawn and just kind of quiet, but my granddaughter, she's the complete opposite. And
Yeah.
then I know when I was watching the video, it also made me think about my granddaughter, because I think I mentioned to some of you that when she was 1 month old, she had heart surgery. And I
Mm,
always wondered, how was she going to remember that, you know,
yeah.
the traumatic experience? Because, you know, I was there when they took her off of the breathing machine. But, you know, even though she does have some, you know, things that she has to deal with, but you know, she still is a happy child, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's there. Like we said, your Akashic records of you is there.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
if you guys are creating alternate experiences as affirmations of the better parts of life, and
Right.
that's a good thing.
Mhm.
I saw Nicole, you were going to say something earlier. I want to give you an opportunity.
Well, thank you. So I am reading a book called What Happened to You.
Mm,
And so
mm,
this is on par. So it's like we never left each other. I just have to tell you that every single time things just come together, and it's so amazing. And he literally talks about this, which he's also a neuroscience scientist
mhm.
and you know, child psychiatrist. So he specifically talks about that in the book, and how, you know, having an adverse childhood definitely affects you. And I know for myself, with the therapy that I've had, I did not realize how it did manifest itself without me recognizing the fact that I do have some childhood things that affected me.
Right.
You know, I really thought that I was able to get over it. You know, you're told, you know, you're strong enough, you understand. You know, I've read lots of books, whatever. I thought that I was strong enough to overcome those things. But no, they manifest themselves if you're not aware of
That's
what
it.
those adverse experiences are. So this is just amazing. I love this.
Good,
Yeah.
good,
In
good,
fact,
good.
I'll share stuff which I think I've shared with Letitia before. You know, coming from a very loving family growing up, very spiritual parents, I still wondered, and I think I resolved the issue later when I was talking to Letitia, I think, but I used to be terrified of my mom not coming back home from work. I would be like, because she was an attorney and she would go to work and I would be running on the streets looking for her. By the time it hit 5:30, if she wasn't somewhere on home, I would be on the streets looking for her. And my father would say, what is driving you to do this? You know, she's coming home. So, but then I
Right.
realized when I was growing up in Delhi in early 70s, there was this war between Pakistan and India, and we were shelled a lot.
Mm,
You know, and that's why I hated that in the casualty of war, the children suffer so much, because they would be this at night, the sirens would go off at 5 o'clock in the evening. And exactly at 5, we had to turn off all the lights. We had black paper on the windows, because in those days you didn't have GPS, and also the lights in the city would be what the planes would use to drop the bombs. So we had to all close all the doors, windows, no fires, no light, blacken the windows, and then go stand in the corner individually with the pencil in the mouth, so that if the bomb falls, you won't bite your teeth. And many times the bomb fell near our home, and it was very frightening. And so by 5, if my mom wasn't home, I was terrified that she would die on the street, because what if a bomb fell on her? What if a bomb fell on her? And that trauma lasted with me till I grew up, until actually I was a grown person, because I would worry that if she's not home by 5, she's dead somewhere, you know?
yeah.
So it's huge for children, you know, especially in war zones. That's why I'm such a big advocate for peace, because I'm like, it creates hell for children who go through war.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, as we're talking, I could think of 100 things that have impacted my life. One of which was my cousin drowning. I was probably about 5 years old. And my cousin, who was also about 5, he drowned. He thought he could swim. He jumped into a retention pond to get a toy. And the retention pond had some kind of suction that was like a whirlpool at the bottom. And he got pulled down. Well, of course, the family panicked. I don't know that my aunt ever recovered from that to this day. But they attempted to get all of us swimming lessons at the time. But the impact of the trauma was so great, I never could learn to swim. And to this day, I don't know how to swim. And I will say that I don't have a fear of water, but it's there. It is there. I can get in the water, I can move around the water, but I'm very respectful of the power that water has to destroy life. And the other thing I'll say is, Jeanette, you were talking about because of your daughter didn't get divorced. And my mom, I can share this because I know my mom has shared, is very open about her and my dad's relationship. I think one of the reasons why I had such difficulty with marriage was that my parents stayed together. They probably should have gotten divorced. And we had to witness their tug of war as they were defining themselves and vying for power and so forth in their relationship. And it wasn't always pretty. And it took me years to really break some of the thinking around it. Still working on some of those things, to be honest with you. Good Lord. Yes. But I had to become aware of the fact that it was even there because I had normalized it and I had created dialogue around it. And that's what we do. That's why becoming aware of what's embedded in your subconscious is so important because it motivates how we respond to the world in everything that we do, even when we're not conscious of it. Even when we're not conscious of it. Anybody else? So we've talked about limiting beliefs. We've talked about childhood traumas. And then I want to just throw out there, and I appreciate that you brought up the war stuff, Anjana, because we forget the impact of PTSD on everyone's life. You know, we have soldiers who have gone to war right now. We have lots of people who have been in war-torn countries and the impact that it has had on their lives and their understanding of the frailty of life, right? The frailty of life. And their need to hold on to some semblance of normalcy and safety. So if I can say nothing else, as we relate to each other, having an awareness that these things not only exist in us, but they exist in the people around us also, encourages us to need to be more gentle with each other, to take a step back when we're in conflict and ask the question, what is driving this conflict, right? What is driving these actions in this moment? Yeah. Any other comments before we move on?
Real quick, Leticia, just I didn't realize the childhood trauma stuff. You know, I had 3 or 4 of them. I didn't realize I had so many on the list. But
Right.
the poverty one was the one that I was unaware of how I was bringing that into my present that really was baseless. But, you know, and you're the one, when I first got to know you, you and one other person went to lunch and you're like, how are you? I said, I started talking about work. You're like, no, you personally. And I was like, I didn't know how to answer. And all of a sudden I started talking about this. I'm fear of sliding back into being poor. And you didn't know me from a can of paint. And you said, does someone in your household have a medical condition, like a medical bankruptcy, you can't afford the bills? I said, no, we're in good health. Your house is underwater? No, got tons of equity. She's like, okay. And then I was like, oh my God, she didn't even say it, but this is ridiculous. I'm not going to be poor. And that moment, that you healed me with asking those 2 questions. And I don't think I ever gave you credit for that.
Oh, well, thank you, Jeff. Powerful questions is the tool of the coach, right? That's what we do best. Ask the right question at the right time. So I'm glad that it helped you. Yeah. We live in fear so much because of these childhood experiences, right? And what's interesting about the childhood experiences is that our brain as a child doesn't comprehend exactly what's going on. And so we create, it almost becomes like the boogeyman, these childhood experiences that we're always running from, even as adults, because we're not aware of it. But when you go back and you look at it as a child, you say, okay, well, it wasn't as big as it seemed. And the best thing I know to use as an example is, have you ever gone back to a house that when you were a child you thought was huge? And then you go back and you're like, holy crap, this house is small. You know, this is such a small house. Oftentimes that's how, for some, and I don't discount that there are some people who had some horrible childhood experiences, but for a good majority of us, they're small. And if we take an adult eye to the experience, we can make it make sense. We can, really begin to correct our thinking about it. But as children, it blows up, it becomes the boogeyman, and it creates a response system and a way of moving through life. And this is why there's so much work around healing the inner child, right? I think my first Reiki experience, that's what the lady who did Reiki on me told me. Go back and do some work, talk to your inner child. I'm like, why do I need to talk to my inner child? And what I realized was that I had totally threw away an experience where I was hospitalized. I was hospitalized and put to sleep at about 9 years old for a procedure. I had no memory of it. I was not conscious of it, but it was affecting things in my life. So, yeah. All right. Yeah, this is deep stuff. And I'm glad that we spent some time on it. I actually said we might be a little late getting out of class. I hadn't told y'all that yet. But because I wanted us to have these dialogues and put ourselves in these places to really start questioning and exploring our limits that we placed on ourselves for whatever reason, whether it be PTSD or ACEs or just what somebody said to us growing up that you couldn't be, right? I want us to really start evaluating that. Now, how does all this apply to spirituality, right? And it's like, why do we need to study these things and understand it? And I mentioned early on about the spirit inside of us dying. Remember that? And I said it can never really die, but significant trauma such as mental or physical abuse and torture has a way of damaging an individual so much so that without the help in healing, in the healing process, they are forever impaired. Trauma inhibits an individual's spirit's expression in the world, limiting their growth potential. The challenge with this is that this potential that lives within inside of us was designed to be expressed. It was designed to be expressed because each one of us is a needed component in the world we live in. And without it, the potential of mankind as a whole is also limited. When we unfold all those things that are within us and allow all these different forces to become joined together as one within us, then we become the true self. And Anjana, do you see my picture, the coaches? I told you we're on the same wavelength. But I want to talk about this, the part of the man that the spirit, the part of the spirit that can die. And I put on here that there are many ways to refer to the part of the spirit that often dies within us. But for this class, we will refer to it as the true self. I could do a whole lot of work to talk about all the different parts of the spirit. There's some folks who say there's 5 different parts of the spirit. There's some people who say there's 7 different parts of the spirit. It just depends on what spiritual tradition you're approaching it from. But to say that it is the true self, to me, refers to it as the oneness, the unity of all of the parts of the spirit. In so much so that we become the unlimited potential of ourselves in action. That is the true self to me, the unlimited potential in action. What psychologist Abraham Maslow refers to as the self-actualized man, or what Michael Singer refers to as the untethered soul in his book by the same name. This true self is the free man, right? It is the Christ that lives in oneness with truth of who we are, oneness with God, and oneness with all things. In reality, this is the part of us that doesn't die, but we just fail to give it life. And that is the greatest travesty, is to not allow that which lies within you to be given life to. The desires, the hopes, the dreams, the talents, the skills, the creations, right? To be given life. Any thoughts on that before I move on? All right. I want to take a few moments to talk about another significant trauma. And I would be remiss not to talk about this one. And it's funny because we never talked about it in all classes that we've had. I've never spent a lot of time on what they call spiritual trauma.
Mm.
But I know so many folks who have had the experience of spiritual trauma, including myself. And so they define spiritual trauma or religious abuse as something that occurs when a person, a leader, or an organization either denies an individual's religious or spiritual belief, or uses their beliefs to coerce action or inaction from the individual. They break it down into two types. The first type is, the first expression is seeking to control the victim's beliefs, behaviors, reactions, and responses through spiritual beliefs or religious texts from within any religion. It's not singular to a religious practice, it's in all of them, or spiritual beliefs or philosophies. And any spiritual or religious belief can be used to exert power over family members or others. And I'll give you some examples that they listed. One is simple, right? Controlling your clothing, your hair, your behavior, relationships, finances, parenting, or family planning. For like in the Catholic Church, for example, don't believe in birth control, right? Or men should be the head of a household. And that's a nice concept. But when it's taken to the extreme, women have to beg for money to take care of even their basic needs, right? That's when it crosses the line into abuse. Instilling fear or embarrassment to silence or to shame or to belittle in order to hurt you. And we see this a lot of the times in the cases of other abuses, like sexual abuse. I remember an episode of Inyala that was pretty mind-blowing. It was a gospel singing group, but they were a church family. Their father was a bishop, the father's father was a bishop, the brother was a bishop in the Church of God in Christ. But all of them had been molested by the brother and the father, just about all of them. But through this religious instillment of fear and shame and coercion, right? They had been silent about it. Silent to the point where out of 7 sisters, at least 4 of them had been molested by the same person. Yeah, it's pretty awful. But they believed that that person somehow higher to God than they were, in spite of the fact that this person was violating them. So this is a way of abuse. preventing you from practicing religious beliefs. Imagine being born into a family of Christians and you might want to practice Wicca, what that might look like. Forcing you to engage in spiritual practice or events that you do not believe in, or isolating you by making you feel like you do not measure up spiritually. Those are a few examples of the first use. The second question of spiritual abuse is when the abuser seeks to justify their own behavior by hearkening or listening and following a certain theology, doctrine, or religious text. And this looks like a few things. Here are a few examples. They claim that their spiritual position in the relationship or the church gives them the authority to make all financial decisions, control all finances, or deprive their partner of money for their and their children's minimal needs. They justify verbal abuse or physical abuse as punishment to correct issues of godly submission. They use you when you disagree. They defend childhood abuse as a form of godly discipline. They excuse sexual coercion or withholding affection on religious grounds. They blame the enemy or demons as a cause for abusive behavior. And they exploit doctrines of forgiveness or mercy to make the abused feel guilty for expecting change or to justify the abuser's superficial or partial apologies. What do you guys think about these things? Yeah.
That is pretty scary. It's, if you think of all the, what was that lemonade, not lemonade, that Kool-Aid stuff that happened,
Yeah.
And especially for small children, they can get so ingrained because of fear of rejection
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I will tell you that for many people, including myself, the moment that you put God said onto it, it takes on a new meaning.
Yep.
And as a child, when you're putting God said or God won't like or God's gonna punish you, because that can be immensely damaging and stunting to a child's growth.
Yeah.
I was on Facebook, and I seen a video of a young lady or a mature lady talking about when she was younger and the incidents that happened to her was because of religion, and she felt like her family was probably like in a I can't even pronounce it right now, but it's in my head,
Satanic worship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because she was like, when she was younger, she was like, she remembered like 5 or 6, her father would have all these guys come to the house and do things to her. And she felt like she had to because of that cult that was in and pleasing to them. And it went on. I was like, I can't even watch this no more.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just can't imagine how parents can do that to the kids.
Happens all the time. Yeah. Kathy, were you gonna say something? Okay. Jeff, go ahead.
I didn't have any of that like directed at me, but I bore witness to it with my mom. It was the 70s. She was extremely devout, like church every Sunday. Wednesday night, we'd go to services when we had time. The whole family would go. She wore chapel veil, like she was a young woman, very devout and poor. So when my father was divorcing her to marry his mistress, she didn't have money. Only celebrities and rich people had therapists. That was, that was reserved for the rich. So who'd she go to? She went to her priest. That was where you got counseling. And it was just the 70s. And the priest was like, it's the woman's job to make the man happy. You cannot get a divorce. And she goes, well, he's marrying this other woman. There's nothing I can do to stop that. The divorce is going to happen. I'm not seeking it, but it's going to happen. And he said, yeah, he blamed her. Like the whole breakdown of the marriage was her fault, even though he was a pilot in the Air Force and was marrying a mistress in Vietnam. Like she spiraled into a clinical depression for 2 years because, you know, being spurned, being a devoted spouse, and your spouse leaves you for someone else, you already feel like crap. And then your minister is just blaming you. I'm still traumatized at how that destroyed her.
Yeah. And I can see how it would. Because your belief is you've been taught this all your life, right? You've been taught this all your life. And you do everything according to what you were taught. And then life does something totally out of left field. And you're held accountable for it when you had no control. Yeah, it's pretty awful. You know, there is a lot going on right now and have been for years with the movement to stop female genital circumcision.
Mhm.
What most people don't realize is that this is a spiritual practice. And the reason that they're having such difficulty stopping it is because our spiritual teachings are so deeply embedded in our DNA. We're talking about generations upon generations of people, cultures, groups of people believing and agreeing to the same thing and not opening their eyes long enough to question the practice, even though they're creating health issues for these women, they're creating mental scars for these women, and it is just a downright horrible practice.
Yep.
Yeah. But it is birthed out of religion. It's birthed out of religion. As when we started the Spiritual Center, I encountered so many people who had been broken because of teachings, because of how their family implemented religious practices, and how their parents disciplined them based on their understanding of God and how they positioned God. And it always broke my heart because while so many people, especially in the Christian church, and I grew up Christian, so many people believe that God was a punisher and he was going to get you and you were going to hell. I always knew God to be much more loving and much more graceful and merciful than what they had been taught. But the sad part about it was that they would have conversations with me, but because the trauma was so bad, they weren't even willing to come to a class or willing to come to a service. And so we really couldn't get some key people who would have been great to support our initiative and our motive with embracing all religions and spirituality. We couldn't get them to participate because they wanted so greatly to separate themselves from anything that even had the appearance of Christianity. And it really broke my heart. One of the things that I want to stress in this moment is this: that true spiritual practice, no matter what form it comes in, is designed to bring you closer to understanding of who you are in relation to God, yourself, and mankind. The role of a spiritual teacher is not to control you or manipulate you to their will, but to point you in the direction towards greater love, greater freedom, greater acceptance, and greater oneness. And honestly, greater expression of you, of who you are. Go ahead, Angela.
So just kind of just sitting here and absorbing what you're actually saying, and coming from a household where my father was a pastor, and he didn't accept his call into the ministry until I was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a little bit difficult for me for that whole entire transition, because I was used to being one way. And then it seemed like now I'm at this certain age where I'm having to change, and
Yeah.
I'm having to do things differently based upon a religion that I really didn't grow up with.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, starting out, I was Catholic.
Wow.
Starting out when I was younger, I went to Catholic school, I went to church, went to catechism, then, went on, and my father became an AME minister.
Mm-hmm.
So it was one of those, it was a huge transition. And then when it got to the point where I was told, okay, in order to enter into the church, you must wear a skirt. And I didn't wear a whole lot of dresses and skirts all the time. I wore my pants and what have you. So it was a huge change for me, and I became very rebellious.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all based upon, you know, being told that I had to do certain things a certain way because of. And so it really, it was a traumatic experience for me,
Right.
with that, and throughout my life, having to deal with people from the church, have been lied on, the whole nine. Went through I've had a lot of traumatic experiences just from the church alone,
Yeah.
and it caused me to leave.
Yeah.
I actually left, even though I was very involved in the church, because it things I love to sing.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the youth organizations and so forth, but that was fun stuff for me. So
Right.
that was okay. But everything else, it just seemed that certain things were dictated by what was in the Bible, or the way people interpreted things in the Bible. And it
That's
was
the
based,
key right there.
and those things were used against me a lot of times, even throughout life, and my lifestyle and my choice of who I prefer to be with. All of those things were Leviticus kept being thrown at me so many times.
Right.
And so forth, and tied down to the point where when I left the church and I decided to later on accept Buddhism, I
Mm-hmm.
had issues with my family,
Yeah.
because no, that's not what you're supposed to do, and it was just, it was a horrible experience. I mean, they accept it now, because I guess at this point they just have no choice, because they know me, that I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do.
Right.
But it was just, just being ridiculed so badly by family, because I made a decision for my own spirituality and decided not to follow what everybody else was doing. I made a
Right.
choice for myself. And because of their way of thinking, to them, that was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, I think we've all experienced that. I was the wayward child, but I was blessed to be able to live away when I made that decision to explore. I think had I been closer to my family, I might have faced a little more resistance. But eventually they came closer to where I was headed. Um,
Well,
still
both
not
of my parents had
100.
been, both my parents were deceased when that decision was made for me. For
Wow.
several decisions in my life, both my parents were deceased, and that was another part for me, because of the fact that both of them were teachers, and then my parents were, in ministry. There was like a thin chalk line that I had to walk. I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, I couldn't do
Yeah.
the other, and it was very traumatic experience, and it hinders a lot of things in my life as I think about, and I know we're talking about spirituality as well too, but that's all a part of it, of how
Yeah.
it hinders certain things in my life. It hinders the way I move, it hinders the way I do certain things, and I have to stop myself and say, wait a minute, no, you're not bound to that. You can do this,
Yeah.
it's not wrong if you do this. It's that sense of wrongness is based upon the way someone else thinks, not the way that you think.
Yes,
And so I
ma'am.
have to constantly remind myself of that all the time, when I find myself not making the moves that I need to make, I would say, because of those things that are embedded in my head as to why I can't do that. And it has hindered a number of things in life, and why I I personally feel that I'm not as far as I could be is because I've allowed those things to hinder me from moving forward.
Yeah. You know, there's a scripture in the Bible that stands out to me, and I had to take it on myself. But I want to say it was the Apostle Peter who had an experience with God where God starts showing him all these things that were unclean and meat, and God says to him to eat it or to touch it or to do whatever. And Peter's like, no, I can't do that. It's been declared unclean. And God basically chastises Peter and says, how dare you reject something that I have said to you to take and declare that it's unclean. If I say that it's clean, then you are free to do with it what you need to do. And oftentimes when we are being bound, because what you describing is what I would call bondage. When we are being bound by these restrictive beliefs and thought processes, then we're saying to ourselves, the desires that are inside of me are not true, they're not godly. And God is saying, but this is what you've been designed to do, right? And now you're holding it back. Yeah, that's I could go on for days with that one. I can go on for days with that
Can
one.
I ask Angela a quick question? Like, it must have gone through your head, because veering from practicing Catholic to a preacher's kid, AME Baptist, that you couldn't get much veering 180 flip flop. But like, where did the skirt dress thing, where's that described in the Bible as if you don't do that, you're a sinner? Like, how do you make that ritualistic connection when, Jesus Christ and God isn't even part of that equation, right? Is that part of what the disenfranchisement was going the path that your family went down? There's too many contradictions and unanswered questions.
Oh yeah. There's actually a scripture in the Bible that says a woman should not wear anything pertaining to a man. But the question is, what was it that was pertaining to a man? Because men were dressed like that.
Scottish men wear kilts.
Yeah.
I was just about to say the kilts.
Yeah.
Is one of them. And believe it or not, I actually went to a church that was here in Atlanta. I visited one, and in the ladies' bathroom, there was a sign in there that basically ridiculed you if you were not wearing a skirt.
Wow.
And I looked at it, and I went because I had to go, but I walked out, and I didn't go back to that church ever again.
Wow.
I didn't, because I just did not feel that was something that should have been there, because from what I understand, it says come as you are.
Yes, that's it.
And if I'm wearing dress, pants, skirt, halter top, or whatever it is that I have on, and I'm coming to receive something, then now you have caused me to miss what I came to receive because of what your particular mandates that are not true.
Yeah. I tell you, it's funny. And Angela, you know this, I was ordained in the Methodist Church when I first started out. And being a woman in ministry and sitting in the pulpit was always an adventure. And one day I had on a skirt with no pantyhose. And I was living in Savannah, it was too hot. So I didn't have on any pantyhose. And one of the older ladies, how she knew I didn't have on pantyhose from where she was sitting, I don't know, but she determined that I wasn't wearing pantyhose. And she came and she chastised me for it and said, you need to wear pantyhose when you're up in that pulpit, and make sure you bring a scarf to cover your legs and this, and the other. And by this time I had got my rebellious nature off me. And so the next time we was at church, I wore pants in the pulpit, and they didn't know what to say.
I'm surprised they didn't criticize you for wearing pants.
Oh, they wasn't gonna come back a second time.
But that happened to a friend of mine. She's a minister, and she went to a church. It was very hot, like in August, and she did not have on pantyhose. And this lady at the time, she was my beautician. She actually scolded her in front of other people. She didn't take her to the side or anything. And I said, wow, that is just really horrible to do that. And it's not that big of a deal, but to her it was,
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
seems like you've got practicing religious people who are true believers, and some truly believe they want to judge other people, and they cloak
Yeah.
themselves as religion.
Let me say this, the one common denominator I found with people who do things like that, yes, is that it is a control mechanism. For the pantyhose situations, the women are trying to control, especially single women. They give us the hardest time. It's like, we don't want our husbands looking at your legs. These are things that motivate people. For parents, it is control of their children. And it's all done in the guise of keeping safety and order, right? But it has nothing to do with spirituality. Spirituality is about freedom. The day I sat in the pulpit and realized that I was miserable and that my life looked like bondage, and I could hear the words of Paul from Romans, I believe, saying, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, for the law of the Spirit of life in Jesus has made us free. And that's where I stopped. I'm like, it made us free from the law of sin and death. And I'm like, where is my freedom? I chose freedom. And I continue to choose freedom. I will not be bound because God said I didn't have to be. That's you trying to make me bound. I'm not going to choose that.
And I'll tell you an interesting thing that happened. My Swamiji, when he came home, my husband was wearing shorts. And you know how everybody says, oh, when he's coming in Indian, there are traditional clothes everywhere. So my friend of mine who's very, very conservative came up to me in my home and said, tell your husband to change into pants. He's wearing shorts and that's not acceptable. I said, this is my husband's home,
That's right.
if he's wearing shorts, let him wear. She says, no, everybody's traditionally dressed and Swamiji's come and he's the spiritual head and you're sitting in front of shorts. And my husband just went. I didn't have the courage to tell my husband to change clothes. So he was outside watering the plants in his shorts. And then Swamiji, came in the car and Swamiji stood and looked at him for some time. And he said, what are you doing? And my husband said, I'm watering the plants. He said, okay, carry on. And he went inside. So during the puja, when everybody was sitting, my husband sat down for the service in his shorts. And Swamiji looked at him and said, I want a pair of those too, so that I can be comfortable. And I looked at my friend's face and he was like grimacing. And I thought, oh my God, how did Swamiji know? Because, that this person had made a comment and he was teaching him, that your clothing doesn't matter. Then Swami says that, I don't know what you wear. He says, if you don't wear anything, doesn't bother me. It's your problem. He said, what you want to wear and come to me, you're like small babies, he said, So you are muted.
Yeah.
You're right. I was saying we major in the minor so much. We major in the minor.
Yeah.
All right. Any last comments before I move on to our last slide of the night? We are behind schedule, but I told you we would be.
Yeah. I may have to drop off in a few minutes. So if I do, I'll quietly drop off. But this is great conversation. Thank you, Letitia.
Good deal. All right. So for our last slide, I wanted to end with this quote from Inyala, because again, I want to reiterate why it is that we're doing this conversation, why we're having a conversation about the subconscious mind and trauma and childhood experiences in a spiritual context. And the reason I chose this quote was because it in essence describes the entire purpose of the spiritual practice from my perspective and from a great many spiritual teachers' perspective. As we learn and heal and grow, we become more and more the divine expressions that we are meant to be. Our purpose then truly unfolds and manifests into being. Our traumas, our limiting beliefs, our memories, experiences, etc., are all stored within the subconscious mind. And in relation to the chakras again, They either block the flow of energy or they increase the flow of energy within us, causing us to go in and out of balance. Holiness, also known as wholeness, in effect, is a state of being in perfect, harmonious balance within ourselves. Our thoughts, our experiences, and expression, all in alignment with our true self. The true self is whole, divine, unlimited, and all-powerful. To move in this direction, we must do the work of healing the subconscious, removing everything that does not align with this truth. And I'll tell you, awareness is just the beginning. It takes a bit of work. And I was going to do the meditation, but we're so far behind. I'm going to skip on to this and let you know what we're going to cover in our next session. And we're going to continue to talk about these traumas. And we're going to talk about triggers. Triggers as a call to heal. We're going to talk about a very spiritual concept called the dark night of the soul, and what it means and how it impacts our spiritual journey. And then we're going to talk about something that Carl Jung introduced to the world. Carl Jung was both a spiritual person, very spiritual person, and a psychologist. But he introduced the concept of shadow work and healing the shadow. And so that will be our next class. It will probably be an equally deep conversation. But that's all we do here at Spirit Led Life Center, right? We do deep. We don't know nothing else. So any thoughts, comments, feelings, etc., before we get ready to close down? Okay.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Letitia.
Good deal.
This
Well,
was very good.
Good. I hope you enjoyed it. It is my goal to see us moving in a much more positive direction as a whole, as a world, and learning and being able to support and help other people in doing the same.
Yeah.
So that is all I have for the night. It has been my pleasure to be with each of you tonight, and I hope to see you all next week.
Yay, thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Have a
Thank
good
you
night.
So much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Good
Letitia.
night, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, y'all have a great night.
You
All
too.
right,
Good
thanks.
night.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.